Welcome to the second in a series of experiments with Tom, where Tom van der Lubbe, I should mention, where we explore different books. So this is a book club. We've come up with a title now for this show. So You Should Read This is the title of the show. So welcome to episode number 2. And Tom's putting the book that you should read up on screen for those just listening. And I've got it too. It's called Reinventing Organizations by a guy called Frederick Laloux. Forward by Ken Wilber. This, has been a book that's had a big impact on me, and I know it has for you too, Tom. Before we came on, we said you'd give an overview of the book, and then perhaps we can dive in.
Yeah, I think it's interesting. Let's say, why do we like the book, or why do we start with it? How did the book influence us? Frederick Laloux is a former consultant, McKinsey. I don't know him, although I also spent some months there. He's from Belgium, and I also read the book a couple of years ago. I think mainly because there are quite some Dutch examples in the book. Buurtzorg, but also BSO origin. And as a student, a long time ago in the 80s, I was a big fan of Eckhart Vincent, BSO. Perhaps we come to that afterwards. And to be radically transparent, I know Jos de Blok quite a bit of Buurtzorg, and I admire him a lot. Great examples in a great and very complex scientific book. So I'm very looking forward to the book. And perhaps 2 sentences about the structure. It's more than 300 pages. It also could have been thousands because there are a lot of stuff in it. And perhaps I leave it to you, Richard, to dive a little bit deeper into the structure of the book.
Yeah. Well, actually, so rather than getting into the structure per se, I thought what I'd show up on screen for people watching, and I'll talk people through it for people listening, is I guess the main thesis of the book, and that is this idea that that organizations can be in various stages of evolution. And he's enumerated them with different colors here, and that they correspond to some degree with the state of the environment in which they're situated. So in a sense, they're a response to their environment. And he starts here with red, and he gives the examples of the archetypes of street gangs, of mafias, where we've got scarce resources, or certainly a perception of scarce resources. And the characteristics of these organizations are power by force, domination, a chief of the group, and it's all about loyalty to that leader and fear of the chief. Very hierarchical, and he says it thrives in a chaotic environment, or certainly a resource-scarce environment. Amber is the next state of evolution here. Conformist is the adjective he uses to describe them. These emerge in colonial empires. Think of religions, governmental institutions, military. This is command and control, rigorous processes, predictability. It's about reproducible and stable processes over time. So think of those early early industrial enterprises. Rigid, not adapted to a changing environment, and that didn't necessarily need to, because in that period of societal development, it wasn't a particularly rapidly changing environment. Orange, I guess, is the one that he leans on most in the book in terms of providing a contrast to what we'll get to next, which is teal. Age of Enlightenment, Industrial and Scientific Revolution. This is about profitability, goal-oriented, predict and control. So there's a focus on what's coming and how do we control our actions to achieve that prediction. Key breakthroughs he talks about here: innovation, accountability. This is meritocracy, focus on material. The symbol here is the machine. And God, we see that in our language all the time right now, don't we, Tom? Like, the machine metaphor just dominates all of our conversations about organizations. And that's a legacy of this stage of evolution of organizations. The orange. Green is pluralistic. He's claiming here emerged in the 60s. these ideas of social entrepreneurship, associations, values around equality, harmony, cooperation, social responsibility, power, empowerment, that word, like we as the bosses will empower the staff, right? A sort of slightly paternalistic, more humane perhaps, but still slightly sort of paternalistic approach to the organization. The metaphor being a family, right? Or the symbol being a family, family organization. You hear that a lot. And leaders in these more humane organizations often talk about, the family when they refer to the organization. And then Teal, so this is, it's become, I suppose, the motif of his work really is this idea of the Teal organization, and an evolutionary, emerging organism, right? That's the kind of metaphor, the way we think about it. Plenty of examples. You just mentioned them in your intro, Tom. One of them, Bertsorg Favi, which is a French company that makes some components for motor cars, engines. So this is about freedom. Trust, very high trust, trusting the individual. The individual has sort of agency and sovereignty within this broader organization, a sense and respond style of operating, self-management, self-leadership, wholeness, a sense of evolutionary purpose, this living organism metaphor. So that's the broad sweep. But like I say, in the book, he draws the greatest distinction between orange, which is where a lot of corporations are right now, and teal. And anything to add to that, Tom, in terms of the sort of broad overview of what he's describing?
Yeah, perhaps in the teal organization, it's a lot about self-management, holacracy, this kind of stuff. And then in the book, he mainly compares the orange column with the teal column.
Yeah.
On a lot of different dimensions. I would say probably 10 or something like that.
Yeah. And so we thought that was where we'd go next, just to give people a sense of what Laloux is talking about, because I think it's best done in terms of contrasting to what we know. And then once we've got more of a handle of what we really mean by a teal organization, then we can start to dive a little bit more specifically into this leadership question and what it means as a human level to lead an organization like this, or be a leader within a teal organization. So stop sharing this now. Let's talk about some of the differences between orange and teal, which exists in the appendix 3 of the book, right? Appendix 4, should I say? Do you want to start by drawing a few out? Maybe you could throw in some, examples from your own organization, Viisi.
Yeah, perhaps it's good to start just with, let's say, the organizational structure, which is number 1 in this overview, where you normally have the classical pyramid, the classical hierarchy, and then in teal, it's about self-organization, it's about trust, it's about decentralized decision-making in the teams itself. That's probably, let's say, from an organizational point of view, probably the core. Holacracy, sociocracy, and then it has different dimensions. Just to take one example, because it's also one of my roles in Viisi, in our company, that if you, for instance, talk about recruitment, you don't have the classical HR department which decides for the teams who should be hired. Now the teams themselves hire, and they also hire in a different way. So it says here, interviews by future colleagues focus on its fit with the organization and with the purpose. So it's not about what technical skills did you have or do you have, and now it's about, do we have the same goals, do we have the same values, do we follow the same purpose, and then the colleagues decide themselves, is this a colleague we want to have on the team, just to take one example.
Right. Yeah. And I'm just one that sticks out to me here, like no executive team meetings, coordination meetings, mostly ad hoc when needs arise. I mean, this to me really illustrates the difference in culture. I've mentioned this to you before, Tom, but often when I've been interviewing leaders of organizations that we might describe as teal, I ask them like when they're available for the podcast. And they're like, I don't know, pick a time anytime in the next month. My diary's empty. I mean, just extraordinary, right? Imagine any other CEO in an amber organization, pretty much of any size. Yeah, their diary is going to be rammed 8 hours a day. Even if you're middle manager, right, in an orange organization, that's probably true. So it's, that idea that people are simply trusted to get on with things, suddenly you don't need the meetings anymore.
My calendar is always half empty. So I always give exactly the same answer. And it doesn't matter if it's a student who writes a thesis or something like that. People are always totally amazed. When I say doesn't matter, just tell me when I should call you. But that's very simple. It has to do with the fact that it's not my job. So it's, colleagues are totally able to do the stuff themselves. That's not my role. And that's typical Teal. Perhaps take another example. It's much focused on, I just take point 7 now, performance management. It's much about teams all the time. So it's not about the individual. It's not about the individual performance. It's not about the one bright guy, just to take the middle one. No, it's always about the team. It's about doing things together. It's about we and not about I. That's probably also something which is very dominant, that the team is always more important than the individual in a sense of the way we work together. And on the human scope, the individual is much about the human being. And so let's say the word HR is just not, you can't use the word HR in the Teal organization, because the word resources to use for a human being is just not appropriate.
Right. And I think this echoes something we'll probably get into in a bit more depth around leadership, is that this is about at some level a sublimation of ego. It's a letting go of ego and asking, not so much, it's less about what's my position, what's my salary, when am I going to get my promotion? And it's how can I serve the team right now? Right? How can I contribute today most effectively? It's a shift, isn't it? At every level in the organization, no matter whom you are in the organization, that's the shift you're encouraged to make.
Yeah, and it's about trust instead of distrust. So it's not that you have to control, that you say, no, trust is not so good, you have to control those people. No, it's exactly the opposite. So you have an enormous amount of examples where Teal leaders are taking off the locks of let's say equipment, because let's say in a classical orange organization would say we have to lock everything, otherwise they will steal the stuff. And that's for instance an example which is in a lot of books. You find those examples. It's all about trust, and also about if something happens, is the way to react on this appropriate or not. So if you have a very safe culture, and then in 10 years' time, somebody is stealing a kind of equipment, does it make sense to lock the stuff then afterwards? So is it appropriate or not? And there are also a lot of examples. But the main thing is just to explain, it's all about trust. Everybody is totally capable of doing the work, and you don't have to tell in a vertical way other people who are much nearer to the job to do what they have to do. So this whole idea of the machine again, that there are some bright people on the top who tell the dumb people on the floor what to do, that's until exactly the other way around. The smart people can decide for themselves how to do the job.
Yeah, or more accurate, often with organizations having been a consultant, is it's not the smart people at the top telling the dumb people what to do. It's the smart people at the top telling the consultants to tell the dumb people what to do. Right?
That's also interesting if you know the background of Frederick Laloux. Also, in his way of writing stuff, it's in a very strong way. So it's not very diplomatic, so to say. So he uses also his experience to be pretty bold on his statements about orange organizations, which were his clients.
Right. Yeah. No, it's fascinating. That's his background, right? Arguably, there's a great article I read a while back, laying at the door of management consultancies the blame for the stripping out of middle management across, in this case, corporate America, and completely disempowering that entire middle layer, putting all of the decision-making into the senior leaders. And then the senior leaders themselves outsourcing a lot of the thinking, which previously would have sat with the middle management, to the consultants. So the consultants do well, senior managers do well. Everybody else beneath them gets kind of screwed in the process.
What is perhaps also interesting to take out is values, which is in the appendix about daily life. And it says in the Orange organization, values are often only a plaque on the wall. And in Teal organizations, they're very about principles, about values, and they really act on it. So it's you don't have an enormous amount of regulation, but everybody knows what's right and wrong, and is really acted on that if something goes wrong. So it says clear values translated into explicit ground rules of acceptable, unacceptable behaviors to foster a safe environment, practices to cultivate discussions about values and ground rules. And that's also a very interesting one, because we don't have any rules on the wall. We have only one rule, the golden rule, which is a very simple one. Just treat others like you wanted to be treated yourself. But it's not on the wall. But we act on it. So if something goes wrong, we would say, just think about it. If you would be in the other position, what would be your behavior? And just sleep a night over it, and then just give us the answer. So it's very strict on acting on those basic principles, but we don't have handbooks as an example.
Right, yeah. And it's about I think the key word here is practices. Practices to cultivate discussions about values and ground rules, right? It's encouraged as a conversation. Yeah. It's not pointed at, on the wall. It's not leaders saying, be like this. It's encouraging these types of inquiries and conversations that have people reflect on their own values and what makes sense. And it's walk
the talk, huh? Yeah. It's really walk the talk.
Yeah. The other one I thought I'd just catching my eye here about information flow, transparency. I mean, we see that over and over again in these organizations. Open information systems. If you think about, I don't think he mentions it, Handelsbanken, doesn't he, in the book, but I know that's been mentioned in other contexts in terms of I don't know if it'd be classed as Teal, but a highly humane organization that, all of the information about all the different branches is available to every other branch, which allows us to learn from each other if we're in one branch versus another in the bank network.
Yeah, all the financial data. And the idea behind this is if all the data are accessible to anybody, you have a much faster and better decision making, because there is no secret information you would need to take a better decision. It's about radical transparency. Salaries is also in a lot of companies open, also in ours, so everybody knows exactly what everybody is earning. So it's the opposite of keeping secrets, or using secrets as a power tool in orange structures, orange organizations. Typical corporate, I know something you don't know, and I can trade it, etc. That's also what he explains in the book.
Yeah. The other thing is just fun is self-decorated warm spaces open to children, animals, and nature. And it's certainly been my experience. I've visited two organizations that are certainly Teal. One is PropellerNet in Brighton in the UK, and another is the Happy Company in East London. And both of them, as soon as you walk in the building, you feel it. Every sense is tuning in. There's something different here. The way the people's faces, the colors on the walls, the general vibe, the laughter, it's just a palpably different environment that you walk to. And it's not like that it's all just fun, because when I think of another organization called 1 Point IQ, which is actually a data, it's a sort of data and machine learning organization, consultancy, and they have meditation on the hour. And in that environment, they're not so much emphasizing the warmth and the fun. But it's just so calm and inviting and just relaxing to be in the space. And there's such a sense of warmth. And so all of these organizations, whilst they might have slightly different flavors, feel very different to that dead cubicle, rank cubicle environment that's so familiar to us all.
Yeah, and it's perhaps what's also interesting is because it's a very practical one. It's not about titles or about functions, which I can also take our company again. We are all called visionaires. So the company is called Viisi, but there are no functions. You have roles and you have topics you care for, but we don't have functions. And then we get new cards, and if you are on the next level, you get curtains on your office or another chair or a bigger table, etc. That all doesn't exist. It's all about the substance. It's very horizontal. So it's flat organizations. I mean, there are layers. There is a kind of hierarchy, but it's much more about the work, about the purpose, and it's less about what's my next uniform and can I add one on my shirt.
All right.
And where's the place reserved for my car and this kind of stuff.
Right. It just goes away.
It's more about the substance and about the purpose. What do we want to change, or what do we want to achieve together?
Yeah, and I think he talks about this in the setup of the book. This is all in the context of this idea of radical abundance, right? If I feel held by nature, if I feel held by the universe, if I feel safe and secure, and I perceive the world to be full of abundance, I'm not going to be interested in chasing the car spot clearest, the car parking spot closest to the door. Or just the perfect example of this was for me as a colleague who worked at PwC, the management consultancy. And she said when she joined that organization, when they'd have clients coming in for tea or coffee, everybody who was a partner would get a gold outline on the saucer of their mug for coffee. And everybody else just got a blue one. And you can imagine the sort of stress and the pain that people will have put themselves through to get that gold rimmed saucer for their coffee mug. But yeah, that goes again. It's in the context of this: the world is abundant. I can trust that the environment, this organization will hold me, and it's all going to be okay, right?
But we still see it also in the buildings, huh? So it's very important to have very high buildings, and the board of directors is on the highest level. And perhaps they have an own elevator where other people are not allowed to take, and they have reserved parking spaces and a driver. And let's say people who are lowest ranked, they are probably on the first floor. That's the way to think. Huh? So it's everybody knows immediately by putting, but also let's say from your clothes. I mean, I'm wearing a white shirt today, but it's white collar, blue collar. It's about suits and ties, and
I've got the blue collar on.
So perhaps I should take another one today, but it's the world we know. The old world of classical vertical hierarchy.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. So maybe that brings us on nicely to this leadership question, and I know he covers that in chapter 3. Should we open this section of the discussion with a quote here from the book, and this is from Dennis. I don't know how to pronounce the surname. Back. Today, there is almost too much focus on leadership, mainly because it is widely thought to be the key to economic success. In fact, the degree to which a leader can actually affect technical performance has been substantially overstated. And I know that there's some research from Dan Kahneman to back that up. On the other hand, the importance and impact of moral leadership on the life and success of an organization has been greatly underappreciated. So I suppose the question to you, Tom, as a leader of a Teal, or as a leader within a Teal organization, how does that quote sit with you?
I think it's something which not only for companies but in general for society is a very good quote. Huh? So the people we admire, like Gandhi and Nelson Mandela, we admire much more than people who are power driven. I don't want to dive into UK politics, but there are a lot of people who are also very orange or very red, we would say. And it's about their power, and it's not about society. It's not about moral statements. It's not about justice. It's not about caring for others. It's not about solidarity. and he dives into the topic of leadership, which I find extremely important and also interesting. That it's but it's also because what we sometimes say, purpose is the CEO, or purpose is the goal, or the power of the organization. And if you have a strong purpose, which also people like Gandhi or Nelson Mandela had, it's not about the person. They are just transporting or let's say they are the human beings who drive these kind of purposes.
Yeah. They're like a vessel for it. But I think, again, for me, it's about, because I had a fascinating interview with Julian Wilson, who's the CEO of Matte Black Systems, which I guess is another Teal organization. And he talks in this, they don't really have a central purpose station for the organization. But what they are in is they've created an environment where people get to reflect on their own purpose and find ways to express it within that organization every day. And the purpose to which it exists within the organization is emerging all the time. And so there's a distinction, isn't there, between an organization with a stated purpose and an organization that allows for sort of purposeful action. Yeah. And it may be you've got a purpose statement on the wall, a bit like we talked about with the values and all. Doesn't necessarily mean you've got a purposeful organization or one that allows individuals to express their purposes every day.
That's right. That's why I also like our main rule, the golden rule, because you can apply it on any context in any company, but also in society. It's like the example I sometimes use is there's an elderly lady waiting at the street to be helped to cross the street, and everybody will go to the lady and help her to cross the street. And everybody finds it totally normal. So this golden rule, you could just say, if you work in an organization, you just want to be kind to others or help each other. And no matter what context, and then probably in buurtzorg, where they care about elderly people at home, it's let's say much simpler to understand where this is all about. And if you talk about, let's say, doing mortgage advice, it's a little bit more complicated. Although you can just say we help clients to get the best mortgage or the mortgage which survives their whole life, etc. But it doesn't matter what you do. If you work in a bakery, you just are friendly and selling bread to people. So you can make things very simple and very, very clear to anybody, because everybody knows from daily life how you want to be treated by others in normal life by others.
Yeah, and that's right. And then this comes back to the question, this trust question. And I know that I've butted heads with you a few times in conversations about, how exactly do you deal with firing somebody, right? Like it's like the classic one, right? And it's the responses from you and from others, who are within this organization, is you just kind of have a trust that the team themselves, the organization, people will know how to handle that. Like, humans know how to deal with friends who aren't pulling their weight or members of the family who aren't, but we know how to deal with that, and we just trust the system to find a resolution.
Yeah, the interesting thing, which we also had discussions on that. The interesting thing is that in normal life, we just behave in a normal way, like the example of the elderly lady we help. So why wouldn't we help our colleagues in the company?
Yeah.
Or why wouldn't we help clients or suppliers? So why would I rip off suppliers if I want to continue to work with them the next 10 years? So it's and it's also something with friends you just don't do, because friendship is about mutual respect and helping each other. So why do you think that an egoistic approach helps in a business context? Or to put it even more let's say profoundly, what I find interesting is that the word egoist is something totally negative, but if you translate it into shareholder value capitalism, which is exactly the same, because it means that you want to maximize your own prospects no matter how others are treated in the ecosystem, just egoistic, then suddenly it's the basic fundament under our, let's say, society, if you talk about stock listed companies. So why do we accept in our company context stuff we wouldn't accept in our families, of our children, with our, let's say, friends, etc., etc.? We just wouldn't accept, or we don't accept.
Right, exactly. Exactly. And you might, and I suppose the argument might have been, well, that's been the classic economic. I mean, well, that's been the way for us to most efficiently distribute resources, such that we all benefit, right? But how do we benefit? We benefit materially. Like, in what way? Like, how is that really a benefit when it comes to how we're going to lead our lives and relate to others and experience life on a daily basis? It's, yeah.
And to link also towards leadership again, let's say in our normal culture or in our religions, it's always about, if you are stronger and you are more privileged, everybody sees it as your duty to help others. You don't have to take Christianity. It doesn't matter what religion you take, or humanism or philosophy, etc. And if you make the link then to his book and to leadership, the role of a leader becomes to focus on that, and just to walk around and say, this is not the way we work here, or take the positive example and say, okay, if a strong person helps a weaker one, that's the way we want to do things here. And then you can talk about coaching, or are you available for questions of younger colleagues, etc. But in the end, it's very simple. The stronger acts in a responsible way and helps the weaker one or the younger one.
Yeah. And he talks about holding space. And I think, to me, it's like holding these, they become the holder of the values, the holder of the ethics, right?
Yeah.
That's one of their principles. Leader within these organizations is holding these, holding the line when it comes to these core principles and core values. And just even as I say that, how much more powerful is that as a statement of leadership than maximizing shareholder value, right? I mean, it just seems so obvious, right, when you put it in such stark terms.
Yeah, especially because in the end we know it's a dead end, huh? Because ecosystems or friendships only survive when they are in balance.
Yeah.
So if you only take from a friendship, then it's very clear that when you're in a weaker or in a difficult position and you would call your friends, they would also say, I'm not there, Richard, because you were also not there when I needed you. So it's in a way, it's all very understandable that you can't, let's say in the long term, you can't act in an egoistic way.
Yeah. And we know that, and all the historical, tradition, religious traditions and spiritual traditions, have imparted this wisdom, and yet somehow that's never got encoded into our business ethics. No, that's right. I just thought I'd throw in a beautiful example from the book in terms of it. An illustration is the Viisi, that he mentions the motor parts manufacturer, and how the guys there are making these car parts. They were taking the excess metal and molding them into little Santa figures, right, to put in the box to send to their customers. And so, the customers opening up this box and seeing these little figurines. I mean, that is just beautiful. And we don't really experience that, do we, in business life, from, in most of the ways we interact. And, that seemed to be emblematic of the change here. It's that care for the individual on the other side.
What I also find interesting, and that's at the end of the book, is he also talks about, which I find very well done. He also talks about the Teal Society.
Right.
So it's I mean, it's not about behavior in organizations. It's just in general. So, and you also see it in politics. So in politics, it's also about long term. If you talk about environment, or about social mobility, or about paying taxes, etc. And that there also it should be the goal or the moral obligation of our leaders to especially in times of crisis, to tell people who are much stronger, it's their duty to help people in need, and not say, no, it's totally right. You are a billionaire, and we still give you a lot of money because you can't pay the loans or the salaries of your people. There's this moral obligation which is very strong in this chapter of leadership. And also, if something happens, and it's also the Favi example he takes, but he also takes other companies as an example, that when something negative happens, that we shouldn't overreact, because it's an exception. So if nothing is stolen, and then after 10 or 20 years somebody steals something, that's not a reason to lock everything and then say, okay, because one person has stolen something, we lock all the material, which makes it much more difficult to work, or also gives the people the impression that they are not trusted, which they don't deserve.
No, I think that point about the broader society is important, because really this isn't. Yeah, when you reflect on it, this isn't really something just to take into business. This is about our personal transformations for each of us, which then get expressed in certain organizations. But really, this evolution is really happening in the context of a broader shift in society and individuals within it. I think that's I think that's what's happening. And as we spoke about in the early part of this, one critique of this thesis might be that it sort of presents a linear progression. But perhaps much of what we're talking about in terms of the themes and patterns here have existed in history before in different forms, and how much of this is really just a remembering, a rediscovering of certain aspects of human wisdom.
Yeah, the interesting question is, are we that civilized? And with a very big question mark. So if you talk about sustainability, we think that because, let's say, from a technical point of view, we have so many means and so many possibilities, we are very civilized. But that's also what Laloux says. But I mean, he's not an exception. How is it possible that we're so proud of ourselves if we see the enormous speed we are ruining our world? I mean, you could also call this extremely uncivilized. And then let's say, if you talk about anthropology, and you would say, no, this, I don't know what kind of tribes we find somewhere who have rules to think, let's say, 6 generations further down the future, or down into the future. This kind of mechanisms, is this even much more civilized than we are? Yeah. Or if you talk about the talking stick and the circle, and everybody has a right to speak, and as an equal structure in a circle, and people are sitting down in the bush, and there's the talking stick, is this much more civilized than our vertical hierarchy, with somebody sitting on the one side of the table and all the other people have to shut up? So that would also be one of my points of critique, that there is still a lot of linear thinking, that you start on the left side of the Excel sheet, where we started also this conversation. And sometimes I think, if you just see, for example, the way we think about also leadership or avoidance of power, then there are, especially in history, a lot of examples where people were very well aware of the avoidance of power. And First Among Equals is just one example, but there are enormous amount of examples. So I would really ask ourselves, are we that civilized, and is our way of linear thinking sometimes very, very arrogant in comparison to let's say, other parts of history which were perhaps more civilized in many ways.
Right. Yeah, exactly. No, I think that I agree with you there. I think this idea that we can sort of reduce it to a linear timeline, is flawed some level. I think the other critique is, and I know that we had Dave Snowden recently on my podcast Being Human, and he rubbishes all of this, right? And I think where he's coming from is, and he didn't say this, I'm kind of characterizing it, is that this is all just reductive, right? You just can't take an organization and kind of categorize it. Oh, you're Teal, right? You meet these metrics and these tick boxes, so therefore, we'll put you in this category. That it's organizations are far too complex to categorize in that way. Which I think there's some validity in that, right? This could be seen as overly reductionist.
But on the other hand, it also helps to discuss. So his enormous amount of work he did in putting, let's say, the whole stuff in a kind of Excel sheet with his 10 dimensions and these different organizations. It in a way, it also makes it, let's say, easy to understand. If you talk about colors in the Catholic Church and the cardinals who are purple, etc., or the army with the ranks, etc. So in a way, it also helps. But I think it would also make sense just to take some examples and, for instance, explain that in Greek society, people thought in a circular way. And since the Enlightenment, we think in a linear way, and perhaps it makes sense to also think in a circular way, especially as he says at the end of the book, it's about zero growth, and zero growth is circular.
Yeah, right. Yes, and the other thing that I agree on the one hand that it is overly reductionist, and you can't sort of then generalize about an entire social institution based on certain characteristics being true. And different behaviors are going to emerge in pockets, in a constant, constantly will be emerging in different ways. But I think the other thing I will say is, again, I'm really restating it, that when I've gone into these organizations, there's something powerfully difficult. There is a sense of I'm experiencing something manifestly different, right? So that also seems to be true, right? So there is a sense there's something that's tangible, that's concrete, that exists, that's different in certain organizations.
And the aspect also, I think, but it's perhaps which is a little bit in the book, also in the by Ken Wilber, or if you talk about spirituality, which I don't want to make bigger, but let's say there is a kind of mechanism that, let's say, being altruistic gives you much more fulfillment than being egoistic. So, which in a way, I sometimes think it's the kind of justice in the system that those people who are very egoistic, it doesn't help them in the end, because it doesn't make them happier, so to say. What makes you happy? To care for others, or working on a purpose, or on the greater picture. So perhaps that's also something, because if we would be more aware of that, perhaps it would also be a road, let's say, towards more altruistic behavior. Because why are people still so happy working in hospitals, being teachers, although it's very hard work? People are not very well paid in comparison to let's say, working in the financial industry, etc. There must be a reason for that. It's just because there's more fulfillment. So, and that's also something I think perhaps we should dive into this another time, because if you talk about leadership, you could just say, okay, is it also about fulfillment? Is it about to become the richest guy on the planet? Is Jeff Bezos probably, or would he be the most happiest person in the world? Or is the guy who built a company and helped much more people, isn't this guy much happier? Probably, mostly a guy. Is this person much happier than just being on this list and saying, okay, I'm the greatest, I'm the richest?
Right. Well, yeah, exactly. And well, then we're getting into the definition of happiness as well, because depending on how you define happiness, you might end up with a different answer. But okay, that feels like we've given we've given a good summation, I suppose, of the thesis here, and we got into a little bit of critique. But yeah, thank you, Tom. We'll flash the book up again for those who are interested. Yeah, we're interested. we're both.
I think we have both the same one. I read it in English.
Oh, you did? Okay. Reinventing Organization. Anyway, thoroughly worth the read. You'll get some inspiration on how things are evolving in the digital world, and maybe even some sense of how you might want to change your own beliefs and behaviors as you navigate this life. So once again, Tom, thank you.
Thank you, Richard.
It's been great. Experiment number 2 of what we're now calling You Should Read This. Our
whole life is one experiment, Richard.
Stay tuned for episode 3 of You Should Read This. Thanks again, Tom. I hope you enjoyed this episode of You Should Read This with me, Richard Atherton, and my fantastic co-host, Tom van der Lubbe. If any of the material in this show resonated with you, if you're thinking, perhaps, how could I take these ideas and apply them in my own leadership or take them forward into my own organization, then I would love to have a conversation with you about that. If that feels like that could be a valuable use of your time, then please do click on the Calendly link in the description for this episode, and that will allow you to book a slot directly into my calendar. And I hope to speak to you soon.